Welcome to Diamonds and Dumpster Fires, the show where we talk about finding strength when life falls apart. I'm your host, Melly, and around here, resilience isn't perfection. It's falling flat, getting back up, and maybe laughing about it later. From breakups to breakthroughs, we mix faith, neuroscience, and a little sass to help you rebuild a life that actually feels like yours. Are you ready? Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. Today we have Danielle Sangalli, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a relationship coach for adult individuals and romantic couples. She helps those who are married or in committed relationships stop feeling alone in their relationship and start spending more quality time with their partner so they can start feeling quality love, support, teamwork, fun, comfort, and excitement with their partner again. Thank you, Danielle, for being here. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'd love to start, as listeners know from the title of this episode, single spousing. That is a very unique term and one that you have coined, and I would love to know, what exactly does that mean?
Yes, I would love to tell you. So I coined this term. It kind of came out of my personal experience in my own relationship, as well as my professional experience working with my clients. So it was kind of a play on the term single parenting. So a lot of people just kind of feeling alone in their parenting responsibilities. But the difference with single spousing is that it's for people who are actually still in their committed relationship, but tend to feel alone with so much of just what comes with the relationship, whether that's just having to make the plans for a lot of the dates that they want to have together, or even just feeling alone in some of the household tasks and things that need to get done. It can happen just be on a physical level, just kind of not really being around each other enough, but it can also be in an emotional level where people just have these mounted up emotions that they really haven't worked through for whatever reason, and it just creates this feeling of disconnect for them.
And what are some of the most common indicators that you see when somebody, might be, say, doing all the work in the relationship and feeling this singleness within a relationship?
Yeah, a lot of people will, just kind of say things like, I feel like we're coexisting. I feel like I'm the one just having to take on the load, whether that's the mental load or just, dealing with the physical tasks in the house. So I just think that people will indicate this based on just this feeling of loneliness, just this lack of teamwork that they're experiencing in the relationship. So they'll kind of describe it that way, that it's like just this feeling of coexisting and just having this physical disconnect with each other. And sometimes just hearing that terminology, it's like my radar goes up. It's like, okay, this sounds like somebody who loves their partner and is committed to them, but is just really feeling alone in a lot of what comes with the relationship.
Very interesting. As listeners know, I went through a divorce about 4 years ago, and I would say that for a few years of my marriage, I actually would have fallen into this camp. Is this kind of a warning sign that maybe if they don't get back on track, something like a divorce or breakup could be coming?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yes, I think that it's definitely possible to shift this, but of course that depends on both people's willingness to work on this in the relationship. So usually I help people who really want to be together and really want to work on that commitment that they have with each other. I help them to just get rid of some of these obstacles and roadblocks they're experiencing. I help them to work through that within themselves, but also with each other. But if it does come down to just one partner not really being willing to work on anything or not being willing to change anything, this becomes like infinitely more complicated, because then that really is an indicator that one partner really is alone in the work and the other person's really okay with how things are and they're not looking to make any changes.
That's definitely something that I would say I experienced. So when you work with individuals in this kind of a scenario, do you have at some point a requirement that they do come as a couple, or will you continue to work with one person who might be wanting to work on the marriage by themselves?
That's a great question. I think it's so important. I think people think that couples counseling is the only route sometimes, and then they can sometimes feel really stuck if their partner isn't willing to do this with them and just isn't open to that process. But I really like to help people realize that any work that they're willing to do on their own end can actually make shifts in the relationship as a whole. So I do recommend that if you're not really able to get your partner to come to couples counseling, they're just not open to it, don't think that that's your only route. You can certainly start counseling by yourself, or and just really start getting clear on maybe what you might be contributing in the relationship that might keep things feeling blocked and disconnected. One indicator of this is if a partner is really having a hard time speaking up for what their wants and needs are. They're kind of keeping that to themselves. They're not realizing that this may be contributing to some of the disconnect, because if they're not expressing what they want and need to their partner, there's no way for their partner to join them in working through this.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So communication is key, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Okay, now I want to go into a little bit about the emotional and mental health of the person who is experiencing this, single spousing effect. How do you see people's mental health being affected?
So there is often just a lot of sadness, feelings of being burnt out and overwhelmed, maybe feeling confused and frustrated and even resentful. So a lot of times what happens is, if we want something as human beings and we can't have it, whatever that may be, sometimes we start to get really withdrawn and we start to give up and we start to just kind of have a lot of self-doubt about whether we're even deserving of that thing. And sometimes we can start turning against the thing that we want because we just want it. And if we can't have it, it starts to become a little bit too painful. So I see this a lot with clients as they start to get really quiet and withdrawn and they start doubting what it is that they're wanting and needing, and just starting to think that maybe they're just too much and maybe, this is as good as it gets in their relationship and nothing's really going to change.
When you have somebody experiencing that, can you share a couple of things? Somebody listening is like, that's me, I'm in that place. What are a couple things they can do to start maybe shifting how they're thinking about the situation?
Yeah, so this is where support becomes really important, because I think if we keep to ourselves and we start to feel shameful about what we're wanting and needing, sometimes maybe we're even getting those comments back from our partner that we're too much or too sensitive or we're making too much out of stuff. It's like sometimes we just need to get that support of others who understand, whether that's a therapist, a coach, or even, a group dynamic. I actually offer a group program, which I'm sure we'll talk about, of just other people who are experiencing similar circumstances and feelings, and just to have that validated and to have, that opportunity to just realize that you don't have to feel ashamed of what you want and need. And it's totally normal to need and want something different than you might be getting in your relationship. So just that validation alone and just that support alone can go such a long way.
Now, I do want to talk a little bit about, people sometimes will get into these patterns and they'll stay stuck. And even when we know it's not sustainable, maybe somebody's in this single spousing pattern, but they might think, you know what, at least it's something I know. I can get through this because, we have this fear of the unknown sometimes. In your experience, why do people end up staying stuck in this pattern when there is this possible beautiful relationship that they could be having?
Yeah, I think a big one, and it's just like such a hard one for me to swallow, is just this belief. I think there's just this overall belief that sometimes comes through in our culture and in our society that relationships just are what they are. And, sometimes just over time, they just become less enjoyable and there's not much excitement or spark anymore. And it's just something we all have to live with. Like that's just how relationships become over time. And maybe we've seen that with others, maybe others have modeled this for us, especially our parents, where it's like, there's a lot of ball and chain comments or just a lot of happy wife, happy life comments, which taken to an extreme can really be problematic. So I would say ultimately that's a huge part of it, is just people believing that this is normal. Like we are not supposed to really have this happy and fulfilled relationship, that's just a fairy tale and maybe a luxury rather than a reality.
Would you say that most relationships, if both people are willing to work on it, can most relationships be saved?
Yes, I would really say that when there's a will, there's a way, for sure. And of course, that depends on the blockages that may be getting in their way. Of course, life just kind of, mixes us up sometimes. And no matter how much we want to be with somebody or commit to them, there could be just major blockages that get in the way of their values, and maybe just things change over time, so they're not as aligned. But for the most part, the willingness to work on it and just keeping in mind, the love and the commitment that they have for each other, there is such a good chance for them overcoming any obstacles that are in their way.
I'd love to talk about how you specifically help your clients start shifting those ingrained patterns and begin reconnecting with themselves and with their partner.
Yeah, so whether or not I'm meeting with clients individually or even as a couple, I often like to start sessions asking my clients what it is that their relationship is worth fighting for. I really want to first and foremost get them in touch with their why, like kind of their will, like we just talked about. Like, what is their biggest motivation? Because if they can keep that at the forefront, it's going to be easier to do some of the work that they have to do following that. So I just like to help them unite in why this is important and why this worth is going to be worth it for them. And so I love to start that way. And then I really like to help them just each get really clear and honest with themselves about what they're needing and wanting, and to become really unapologetic about this, not in a way that's like harsh or hurtful to the other person, but just so that they can get really clear and honest about some things they may have not been sharing with each other before. Because if we don't have everything out on the table, it's going to be really, really hard to find compromise and to work them toward shared values going forward.
Makes a lot of sense. And so as they're doing this kind of rebuilding of a connection, what are some of the small but powerful steps that they can take if they both decide, okay, we do want to reconnect, they start sharing, opening up, what else can they do?
So it's really just, again, just getting clear on their wants and needs, working through some discomfort about bringing that to the table. And so I would say that some small steps, even for people who haven't even started counseling, you could just start with getting really honest in your communication. Even I know that could be tough and scary for some, but, really just in a very loving way, letting their partner know that like they're missing them, whether that's just with quality time or trying to work through maybe some tough conversations. It's just saying, I really miss you, and, requesting their support and effort with finding some ways to start getting closer. So that would be one way, is just getting really honest in that communication, just first and foremost, and just saying, hey, I'm noticing that we're kind of distancing a little bit, and I would really like to get back on track with some closeness. And then scheduling some time together, whatever that might look like. I think we get away from this. We think that naturally, that time is just going to be there. And okay, especially if you're living together, right? It's like, oh, we see each other all the time, but that's not necessarily quality time that you're spending together. So can you set aside some intentional quality time for just the two of you, even if it's just once, just to kind of get the ball rolling? But I would highly recommend maybe trying to do that at least once a week, just having some of that time together, even if it's just a couple hours. It doesn't have to be a whole day. Something else I would just say is appreciation, just letting each other know what you're appreciating and noticing about each other. These are some really simple ways to get the ball rolling with just formulating more connection with each other.
I love that idea, because I think when you've been with somebody, especially for like a long period of time, it's very easy to take them for granted. And so we might not let them know all the little things that they do that we actually really do appreciate, but we maybe don't verbalize it to our partners. So I
For
love
sure.
that you mentioned that.
Yes.
I do have a question. When I was going through this type of situation, I was a military spouse and my ex was deployed a lot. And I know we have military spouses who do listen to the show. Do you have any tips for them if they're going through this situation when, time together might be really limited, or they might even have, say, 6 months to a year where they're actually physically apart?
Oh my goodness. Yes, such a good question. My heart just goes out to them. I feel that I've had sort of a smaller version of this for my own personal life, even with my husband, because he worked at a hospital for most of our relationship. And we actually met when we were 18. So we like dated for a long time before we got married. And we had this like back and forth struggle with his schedule, and he didn't really have a set schedule. And even though like we didn't have that same physical distance as like military couples, we still kind of had this obstacle. This is where the whole single spousing thing came up for me, where it was like, oh my gosh, here we are. We have the ability to be close together, but we're not actually getting that quality time. He had to pick up a lot of shifts randomly. There was low staffing. There was so much throughout our relationship before he had a pretty set schedule that we had to scramble a lot around. And it was really hard to find that quality time together. But the best thing that I think we did for each other was we got so crazy creative with the ways that we were able to connect with each other. Some of it felt like we were just relying on text messages and voicemails, but then we were able to just get really, really creative with different ways of connecting with each other, even especially if it couldn't be in person as much as we would have wanted. So not to overly compare, because I think these situations are very different, but that creativity and again, that willingness can help you to overcome even the toughest obstacles, the toughest divide when it comes to your relationship. But I would say it's definitely more challenging for some than others.
Definitely. Nowadays, we've got, text messages, we've got emails, we've got apps where you can send little notes and there's a lot of ways to connect. I wonder how people did it back when we didn't have any of that. It would have been so difficult, right?
So true. Yes. Oh my gosh, such a good point. Sometimes we just have to make use. Like sometimes we can be really stubborn about the kind of connection we want. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like you're more than welcome to want the kind of connection you want. But let's get creative. Let's get open. Let's start getting excited about some of the many other options we have to stay connected to each other. That's a huge focus.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd love it if you could share maybe a success story where a couple has worked through this dynamic and came out stronger.
Sure, yeah. So again, just to reiterate, single spousing can be that, huge physical long distance gap that you're experiencing in the relationship, but it can just be these emotional obstacles that come up and create blockages for even people who are in the same space, in the same room. They can feel so far away from each other. Feeling like a single spouse can come up in so many different aspects. And so one case that occurs to me is this one client that I actually worked with for a long time. She was a female client. And I started sessions with her just based on her own tendency to people please and, really struggle with perfectionism and some of her self-worth issues. She was very conflict avoidant, and this had been a struggle for her throughout her life in different ways in different relationships. And she's always been a hard worker. She was always overextending herself for the sake of others and always putting her own needs aside, thinking that this would be what's best for her relationship. But often she would just find herself really down and drained a lot of the time. And believe it or not, this would just perpetuate impulses for her to do more and to do better. And she was really seeking this, acceptance and this love that she wasn't really getting from others, especially when it came to her husband. So she kept having this approach of if I just keep doing, if I keep just, going strong and, doing things for others, they'll start to see how valuable I am and how worthy I am. And I'll start to feel more appreciated and loved. But she would just keep hitting the same roadblocks with that because it never just takes the work of one. Any relationship work has to take the work of two. So what was so interesting is things came to a head at one point when she was just really overexhausting herself and doing so much for her partner and her family until her partner came to her and actually let her know that he was feeling particularly unsatisfied and unhappy with their sexual relationship. And he started to go into this, really tough spot to say, I'm not really sure how we're going to be able to move past this. And this really caught her off guard because here she is thinking she's doing everything possible for this relationship. She's bending over backwards, doing so many things that she considered important for the relationship. But meanwhile, she really wasn't slowing down to check in with him to see what he thought was most important. So she was overworking herself in all these ways without actually slowing down enough to check in with her partner and connect with him in the ways that he was needing and the ways that he was wanting. And the same was going for her. She was really hoping for that validation and appreciation, which just was not coming from her partner because he was feeling not appreciated himself. So what was so interesting about the story is that she never in a million years thought that her partner would join her in couples counseling. And so she was just not even going to bother, not even going to want to bring him to the table with that. But we worked on this. We really worked on her communication strategies and her discomfort around trying to bring her partner into this work with her. And to her surprise, he actually did join her in the couples work. And they were able to make some real progress together. And they were able to realize that what they were both needing and wanting from each other, they really weren't communicating about. And they were just staying on their own separate sides of the home, kind of, dividing and conquering and doing what needed to be done, but not actually checking in with each other on what each other needed most. And so that we really worked toward compromise and slowing down and communicating differently going forward. And they were able to really get to such a better place in their relationship after all this work that they were doing together.
What a great story.
Yes.
I want to go back to one thing you said. You mentioned that the woman in this relationship tended to have like people pleasing, avoided those tough conversations, hard worker. Would you say that in a lot of the single spousing situations, there is one partner who is more of the constantly doing, and then maybe the other partner avoids? Have you seen this pattern pop up anywhere?
Yes, a major pattern is really just this, trying to keep the peace and trying to, not rock the boat and really, the people pleasing tendency, unfortunately, I mean, a big thing I often say is people pleasing pleases no people. because in the end you're not getting what you need for yourself, and the other people really aren't getting what they need. It's based on a lot of your assumption about what people are needing and wanting. So yeah, these are huge traits that tend to come up in these single spousing stories. It's usually one partner that's taking on too much of the responsibility, whether emotionally or physically, and they're not realizing that that's actually getting in their way. They're trying to do it all, but then they're not really making space for their partner to step up and do their part.
That makes a lot of sense. It kind of reminds me, there's a book that I read, it was a couple years ago, called Try Softer, I think is the title, and I'll link it in the show notes. But it's basically, it was by a therapist who said, sometimes we try so hard to fix things or do things when really, like, maybe we need to try a little softer. In these instances, for somebody who does kind of have that mindset of, I'm just going to fix it all myself, maybe they need to like lean back a little and let their partner tell them what it is that they need instead of assuming and doing and trying to please them. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Beautifully said. Exactly. I think that's part of the struggle is we tend to, a lot of people in single spouse and relationships, you can kind of look externally and say, oh my gosh, if only my partner wasn't working so much, or if only he had a set schedule, or, if only this or that, right? So that was kind of my voice when I was going through this in my personal relationship. But I had to check in with myself and say, why am I just saying these things to myself? Why am I not actually sharing these feelings and thoughts with my partner more? Maybe he needs to hear that I need something to be different in order for things to shift. Otherwise, on the surface, it looks like I'm just doing my part to work along with it and managing myself in the process. And there's really no indication that anything needs to change.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I know a lot of the listeners here on this podcast are actually single. Many, have never been married. Some are divorced. What advice would you give to those single listeners who are listening to this and they're like, okay, when I get into a new relationship, I really want it to be healthy, but how do I structure things from the start so that maybe I don't end up in a single spousing relationship?
A beautiful question. So, a big part here, too, is sometimes we could get so caught up, singles, especially, as we're trying to enter our relationships, we're so caught up in trying to find the right person for us, who's going to fit what it is that we're needing and wanting. And we're not necessarily always taking, accountability for what we could be doing differently or how we might be showing up in these scenarios. So obviously both are important. This is not about just, one person being at fault if things don't work out, but it's a really good place to start is to really get some clarity about even your own personal motivation, first and foremost, about even wanting a relationship. What is your motivation? Is this something you truly want, or is it because this is just what other people are doing? So really getting clear about how serious you even are about what being in a healthy relationship is. And then also checking in with your relationship mindset. Like, what do you believe a relationship should be? And where do you think those beliefs come from? So really getting a little bit clear with yourself about, your starting point with all of this. What's your relationship mindset? And are you willing to do what it takes to try to adapt and work with the other person and what it is they might need? So also another big piece is, just addressing maybe some past and current relationship challenges that you've had and, maybe acknowledging what your role might be in some of the complications that came up, whether this was a romantic relationship or not. Sometimes it's really good to take a look at your behavior in relationships. Do you have people pleasing tendencies? Do you have trouble compromising? Or do you have trouble speaking up for your wants and needs? Do you feel like you tend to keep your expectations to yourself and not really share them with others and just hope that they meet them in some way? These are really good questions to ask yourself. And a lot of times it's really helpful to explore some of these things in therapy.
I love the question you should ask yourself is, what do you believe a healthy relationship should be? I think that's so important because a lot of times, like you said, we go in looking for the perfect person, right? But then we're not really like looking at it as this holistic relationship. It's more about the other person. At what point is that a question that you would ask a potential partner? Obviously not a first date question, right? But how do you approach that, and when would be the right timing?
That's a great question, too. So, this question is really to start with your own definition first. So, I think this is something what happens is I think we sometimes want some clarity for how we're feeling about something. So, we ask the other person before we actually check in with ourselves. So, I just think it's good to start there, like check in with yourself. What's my relationship mindset? What do I think a relationship should be? And once you have some clarity around that, you may not even, I'm not saying you can't ask this question, but you may not even need to. You may be able to see where that partner lines up a little bit with that other person, whoever you're dating. You may be able to start to see if they embody that mindset along with you. So you might be able to actually see that just in the actions or the way they speak to you or some of their values. So that may just come through on its own without you having to be so explicit about it. But I would say, I think communication is what it's all about, no matter where you're at in a relationship, even if you're just starting out. I think communication is so important. So, yeah, I would say feel that out for yourself. I don't think there's really a right or wrong. I think that if you feel like you're in a solid place and grounded with your own answer to that, then, feel free to ask that to somebody else. What do you think a relationship should be? And then try to give them some time to consider that, because you likely needed some time to consider it yourself.
True. Very good advice. Thank you. Now, another thing that you mentioned is that, it's important as we, especially for those of us who've had long-term relationships and those didn't work out, to kind of think back on our own part in that relationship. What did I do? What do I need to change? I know a lot of people that listen to this show, they're in that state where they've been divorced. They're feeling maybe a lot of shame or discomfort around what happened. They can't go back and change it. It's done. How do they move forward? How do they take that, learn from it, but not let it be a stumbling block for them to pursue future relationships?
Yeah. So I think it's so great to have that insight, and the fact that you've even done that work to check in with yourself and own, oh my goodness, I wasn't really proud of how I showed up here or there, and not necessarily judging yourself or blaming yourself, because whatever you were doing, you likely felt like that was the best thing or what you needed to be doing at the time. And of course, your partner, no matter what, had some influence on that behavior. I do always believe that there's this give and take in relationships. So whatever we're doing in a relationship always has some kind of influence from the other person in some way. But I do think that if it tends to be a pattern of yours, it's really good to just pay attention, that it's okay, well, this isn't something that just showed up in this one relationship. This is something that I've seen happen, whether it's with parents or with friends or with previous partners. So I know that this is something that's ingrained in me, and it's something that I just need to make sure I'm aware of. So as long as you're keeping that on the forefront and not in a judgmental way, but just saying, okay, I know that this is a tendency of mine, okay, how can I work through practicing not allowing this thing to come up again, or not allowing this approach to take over, or not allowing my emotions to get the best of me in some of these situations. So I think awareness is such a key piece there. So if you do have that awareness and insight, you're likely going to be set up for better success going forward, especially if you're not fearing this thing getting in the way constantly. It's let's just be aware of it, but not fearful of it.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, now let's get back to, I know we took a little tangent there for the singles, but going back, you do have a group program, Relationship to Engagementship. Can you give us a little overview of that program?
Absolutely. So along with single spousing, I coined the term engagementship. I don't think it's anywhere out there as far as I know.
I've not seen it.
So the whole point of this engagementship is that I want people doing more than just relating. So of course, relationships kind of have that concept in it. It's relation, you have a relation to that person, but I want people engaging. So engagementships are relationships that no longer settle for the bare minimum and are made up of people who mutually want to make efforts to connect on a deeper level, physically, mentally, and emotionally. So that's where that term comes from. And so I created a group specifically for women right now. So just maybe for a handful of women, I'm hoping to put together this group where they can come together and work toward this connection and fulfillment they're hoping to start achieving in their outside romantic partnerships. So this could be a really great alternative to couples counseling, because there's relational work within, because you're working with others, but you're not having to necessarily work with your partner right now in this very direct and intimate way. I love couples counseling. I think it's a fantastic option. And yet I do think that sometimes it's a really intimidating thing for people who just don't feel ready for that step, or if they have a partner that's just not open to that process. So I wanted to create something where people can still get this relational work and relational self-growth going, but with the support as they start taking steps to better their relationships outside. And this group is just a great opportunity for not only this personal work that they'll be doing on their own ends to see how they might be creating some of the struggle with the disconnect in the relationship, but there will be intended exercises and steps they could take to bring their partner into this work from the outside.
Awesome. Can you give us like a little sneak peek of maybe what one of those exercises might be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a big piece is I will be asking some really deep and meaningful questions, kind of like some of what we talked about earlier, but really just kind of helping people get clear on where their ideas of, relationship health have come from. Like, what is a healthy relationship? Not everybody answers that question the same way. So, taking them through some of these really comprehensive worksheets that I have that have so many questions in there that they likely have not really addressed for themselves. So just things checking in with themselves so that they can start thinking about themselves in relation to their relationship. But what are they doing that might be blocking some of the connection that they're hoping for in the relationship? And again, this is not about blame, but it's to help people to actually focus on what they can control in the situation rather than just waiting on the sideline and waiting for their partner to make some changes. So these questions are really designed to help them really get clear on what they could be doing a little bit differently. Because a lot of people come to me thinking that they've already tried everything. They're like, I'm already out of ideas. I don't know what else I could be doing. And then as they start working through some of these worksheets and questions, they can start acknowledging, like, oh, wow, I really never thought about this. And I've never realized that this trait that I actually thought was a healthy trait is actually creating some stumbling blocks in my relationship. So not only will they work through those worksheets and questions, but there will be accompanying steps that they can take to bring this work to their partner. One exercise in there is actually writing a letter to their partner about what it is that they would really like to see differently in the relationship going forward. And not that they have to give that to their partner, they can, but this is just a way of them freely expressing, because a lot of these people struggle with communication and getting clear about what they want and need and just expressing it to their partner. So this is like a really great exercise to help them just have a safe way to communicate very freely and openly about what they're wanting in a way that's geared toward their partner, but without actually having to worry about what their partner's reaction might be. Because this is a lot of times what gets in the way of people expressing themselves is they're worried about what kind of reaction they're going to get from their partner. We have to unlock that for them first before they're ever going to want to take a step to communicate with their partner. So of course, I will encourage, sharing, and we will work toward that. And that is a big goal for the group, is bringing our partner into this work. But let's first and foremost unlock some of those emotions and help them get out of their own way from expressing what they need to express.
If somebody listening is feeling like, they would like to move forward with this work and bring their partner along, try to build a better relationship, but they are afraid of letting their partner know, because sometimes communication, especially if you've been in a relationship where communication hasn't been strong, it's kind of scary to just dive in and be like, here's a list of demands of what I want, which is obviously not what we want to share, right?
Right, of course. Yeah. So that is exactly where the group support comes in, because you're going to be able to, first of all, there's 24/7 written support access in the group. So you can just shop with us, like shop with the other members in there. Like, hey, how does this sound? How does this come off? Does this make sense? Right. So you're actually using each other to get clear on the communication, and everybody's going to be able to share what their take is on what's being shared in the group. So there's that mirror that you'd be able to get in the group before ever having to worry about approaching your partner in a way that feels uncomfortable. So I just think this is such a safe container for people who are just so out of practice or just so not used to standing up for what they need and speaking up for what they need, and letting their concern for their partner's reaction or feelings get in the way of addressing their own.
Is this program for a certain number of weeks, or how does that work?
Yeah, so right now it's actually designed as a 6-month container. So there will actually be group calls, live calls twice per month with 24/7 access to written support throughout the program. So it's designed for these 12 modules that the women will work through. These are very crucial topic modules for relationships to help them really start building a new connection with their partner, even without their partner having to be directly involved in the group. So it's actually designed as a 6-month container. I will say too, though, aside from that, I do offer some one-on-one coaching options too. So if people do want to just get a feel for how I work and they really want to take some steps to get started, and they really just want to feel just a sense of that support within just the one-on-one work, that's an option that's available as well for them.
Wonderful. And we will have links in the show notes. You'll be able to get a link to this upcoming group program. You'll also be able to get a link to Danielle's webpage where you can go to sign up for some one-on-one coaching or reach out to ask her any questions that you might have about signing up. So that will all be available in the show notes and on diamondsanddumpsterfires.com. If you go to episodes, you'll be able to see that in the post about the episode as well. So, Danielle, thank you so much for all this information today. There's a lot of people struggling through these single spousing scenarios, and I love the work that you're doing because I can see even myself in that, 5 years ago, even maybe 5 years before that, when things were starting to get a little rocky, that I could have potentially fixed things had I known what to do. So I love that you are helping people regain their marriages, their relationships, and find ways to communicate. Because I agree, communication is really such a big topic. And I really appreciate you sharing everything you have today.
You're so welcome. And thank you for sharing that. And I just think that, I think it's amazing to be able to help people with these scenarios because it is so possible to get to a better place. And yet I do want to say, sometimes we have to really be clear on the distinction between what is hard in our relationships and what is unhealthy. And I think sometimes certain relationships just aren't healthy. So we're not here to push on with something that's just feeling completely unhealthy and not manageable. We need this work to be tolerable. We need this work to be safe and workable. So that's something I'm always assessing for as well with any of the people that I'm working with. But I do want to say that, we don't have to settle. It is not just about, buying a house, wearing a ring. It could be so much more than just lying in the bed side by side together. There is such better connection and fulfillment possible for all relationships.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here today. This ends today's episode of Diamonds and Dumpster Fires. Please check out the show notes for all of Danielle's links and join us next week for our next episode. That's a wrap on this episode of Diamonds and Dumpster Fires. If you're walking through the ashes right now, remember, you're not broken. You are becoming. Don't forget to subscribe, share with a friend who needs it, and come back next week for more faith, honesty, and a whole lot of heart. See you next time.